I want to thank you all for joining me this morning and finding us. This was a voyage through the halls. What I'd like to do before I get started talking about myself is I know some of you are parents and I know some of you are service providers. If I could sort of get a sense of who's who. If you are a service provider working with students or individuals, could you give me a show of hands? Excellent. And parents? Excellent. Thank you. Well, my reason for being here today is twofold. One is that I have been the parent of individuals on the autism spectrum now for, gosh, 20 years. My oldest son is 20 years old. I have to kind of stop, because sometimes I subtract and say, well, we didn't know till he was 3, but that doesn't count. And it's like, no, that counted. I was still his parent. They make me take credit for that. So my oldest son is 20, and then I have a younger son who's 17, both diagnosed on the autism spectrum and both also with other comorbid mental health disabilities. You know, all those other letters that they put after the ASD that makes life interesting. I also have worked for the past 10 plus years as an advocate assisting parents with navigating through the special education process. So through the process of doing both of these and helping my 2 sons work through transition, I've learned a lot about what works, what doesn't work, what to try, etc. And so my reason for being here today is to share some thoughts, some insights, some suggestions to hopefully help those of you who are parents as well as those of you who are service providers working with families. So what I'm going to do is start with, as you can see on the handout, I have what I'm calling 6 general lessons and then 3 specifics. And then what you'll also see is I've provided you with a double-sided page, which is a checklist. And we'll talk about some of the items on that checklist as well. My request will be, if you have a really, really, really great question, if you don't mind jotting it down, and then we can do questions at the end just so that we can kind of keep the flow of things going. And I'm going to be looking down here a little just because I wrote some really good thoughts and I don't want to lose them. So let me start then with 6 general lessons. The first one, you'll see they're kind of catchy, I had fun making them up, is keep hope alive. Which means, irregardless of the age or stage of the individual on the autism spectrum, continue looking for opportunities for them to grow and build skills. Now, I know that might sound to many of you obvious, but there are times when you just are told or say, okay, that's it. We're done with X, or we're done with Y, or we've hit a plateau, or whatever. And one of my favorite stories, which always brings tears to my eyes, is a very good friend of mine whose son is a couple of years older than my oldest son, so he's now in his mid-20s. She walked up to me one day, tears in her eyes. Her son was about 17. And I said, oh my God, what's wrong? And she said, he's tying the shoes. And I started crying. And we stood there and hugged each other, and she said, he's tying the shoes. On any other place on the planet, that makes no sense. But right here, right now, oh my God. And so, keeping hope alive, thinking about intervention, see, there I go again, thinking about strategies, thinking about opportunities, thinking about skills, always there. And I think it's just a really, really important general, and celebrating those successes. My older son and I were at a fundraising event the other day, bowling, and he walked up to someone he didn't know very well, and he said, I don't remember you, what's your name? And the person said his name, and he said, and where do I know you from? And I'm about 2 feet away going, oh my God, right? And the person afterwards walked over and went, great eye contact. And I said, no, tell him, right? So those moments, and I went home and I was like, you're not going to, he just walked up and said, hi, what's your name? I don't remember you. Now, you all know, working with these kids, I mean, I can sit there and I can go, that was 5 years. It was 5 years of teaching him to remember that's how you start a conversation, and he just went and did it. So always, always continuing to build skills, irregardless of the age or stage, and not saying, okay, well, at transition, well, that must be some sort of plateau, and that's a launch point. Second general rule, burnout is not a pretty sight. In our endeavors to help these young people, we sometimes can burn ourselves out and get to that point. We can say, well, I don't see why we couldn't add 3 more hours of therapy a day. I mean, he's already up at 6 a.m., so if we threw another session in there between 7 and 9 p.m., at some point, being able to prioritize and being able to say, if we're going to do too much, we're losing quality because of quantity. So making some, and thinking about decisions, about how we're going to prioritize. And my favorite strategy for coming up with priorities is what I call the 3 a.m. brainstorm. And it works for parents, but it also works for service providers. And you are up at 3 a.m. and you take a big old piece of paper, and in a perfect brainstorming mode, you write down every single issue, every single question, every single concern, every single skill, every single, this is what I hope she's doing, I want her to be able to do, etc., etc. Go to sleep for a couple hours. Come back, one highlighter, circle 3. That's it. Of all of them, these are the 3 we're going to work on now. Yes, the others are important, but we can really, really realistically only prioritize. And think too in terms of those gateway skills. I'm sure many of you have seen the situation where there's an individual who's really presenting with a lot of very significant behaviors. And we say it's probably coming from the fact that their communication system, they don't have one. And they're probably just so frustrated that they're really trying to tell us something and they can't get it out. So if we prioritize a communication system for them, whether that be verbal, whether that be ASL, whether that be an assistive technology device, we're probably going to get a big bang for our buck and reduce some of these difficult behaviors if we can have a system where they can communicate what they're thinking and feeling, their wants and needs. So it doesn't mean everything else will never happen. And it doesn't mean that, for example, their service plan or their IEP is only 2 pages. It's saying what are the most important things. And what I always suggest is once you've done a really good 3 a.m. brainstorm, take that and communicate that to your village, which is all the people who are working with, those are the family members, those are the service providers, school-based, private, whoever. That's the folks at the recreation program, and say, I want to let you know the things we're making a priority right now are. And they could be, responding to greetings, toileting, and not hitting. Those are our big 3. Yes, all the other things are important, but those are our big 3. And I really, really embrace the concept of a village. For both of my sons, I told them a long time ago, they each had a village. And as new people come on, I'm like, really, here's your village membership card. You're now part of my kid's village. Because it really is. We need that communication system. We need everybody on the same page. So you can really help reduce likelihoods of burnouts. And those of you who are service providers have probably seen situations where the parent is just like, I'm just done. I just can't do this anymore. This is too much. Suggest maybe to them a 3 a.m. brainstorm. What should we prioritize? What should we focus on? And that can really help them. And then for the parents, the same way. What's the most important thing? Okay? My next general suggestion and lesson, again, for any age and stage, but including transition, is taking deep breaths and putting on your listening ears. And I say this particularly to the parents because there are going to be situations that are going to be confusing and frustrating and overwhelming, and you're just going to be looking around for a sharp object. You know those moments where it's just very, very, very overwhelming. And you feel as if you're being talked at, and you feel as if you're being told, come on, right now, you got to make a decision right now, come on. You know what? I'm sorry, the next meeting is starting, and we don't have time for you, and you're thinking. And your ability to not charge forward with your guns and emotions blazing, your ability to just find a way to get calm and say, could I just have a minute? I kind of need to regroup here. I was at an IEP meeting, real quick story, just this past Friday, and the parents had indicated to the school team their proposal for their son's transition-related services for the coming school year. And And the school team said, okay, we're listening, but guess what, we're really not, because here's what we're going to propose, and here's what we're going to tell you should do, and here's what we're going to tell you why you should do it, and da-da-da-da-da. And there was about 7 of them talking at the parents, and here's the draft, and we want you to do this. And you could just see, you know, and the parent, dad was about ready to grab something sharp, and mom was about ready just to crumble and cry. And I said, could you all just be quiet? Could they have like a minute to process? And it truly hadn't occurred to them, and they were truly being well-intended, but it hadn't occurred to them that they hadn't given these people time to process. And I said, better yet, we're going to step out into the hall for just a minute. And we went out in the hall, and I said, don't say a word, breathe. And they were like, oh, breathing, oh, good idea. And I said, now, think about what you heard. Don't tell me what you're thinking. Think about what you heard. And all they heard was, they were being pressured. They didn't hear the benefits of the proposal. They didn't hear the good reasons that were being presented by the school team. All they heard was we're being pressured, we're being ambushed, we're being cornered. And I said, do you understand the school team doesn't know that? They think what they've done is just given you tons of helpful information. So I said, we're going to go back in, you're going to tell them how you're feeling, and then you're going to ask one person to speak at a time, and you're going to put your listening ears on. And you're not going to listen for ambush, you're going to listen for what they're sharing. Because they wanted to go back in and go, "Argh," because they were feeling attacked. And they did. They said, all we heard was ambush, all we heard was pressure. We want to hear your proposals, try again one at a time. And when each person spoke one at a time, and they listened, then they were able to give a reasonable response. And then we were able to have a reasonable discussion about the issue instead of the emotion of the school team feeling like they had to do it and the parents feeling like they were being pressured to do it. And we then came to an agreement that everyone felt comfortable with. So having the power to say, I can't hear you right now, and I need to take a break. And I'm betting even for service providers, there were times where you just said, okay, sharp object, hang on, here I go. Use that cue as a way to say, I need to calm down. I need to get to a calm place. I need to be able to a point where I can actually hear what you're saying and listen. And particularly, again, there's going to be a lot of stuff that goes on related to transitions. It's very confusing and very overwhelming, and decisions have to be made because, you know, oh, we only have another year, blah, 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 blah. So it can be very important then. My next general suggestion is look beyond the schoolhouse doors. And guess what? We're outside the schoolhouse doors, so that's cool. Knowing and starting to build community resources, community supports, community connections. As an example, we want our young people, as they're working their way through the transition process, to be familiar with potential businesses in the community where they might be interested in working. We want them to be thinking about, if they're planning on going to college, going to those colleges and visiting, as we would for a student who didn't have a disability. Okay? We want to think about the support networks that are out there. And my favorite is basically looking at the programs that can help build the skills beyond what is within the school day curriculum. So if you're looking for job development skills, yes, the school program may be doing some of that, but who else out there is doing that the young person can participate in? Those are the types of things. Looking for the community programs, the community activities. One of my sons, for example, started out as a camper in a program for kids with disabilities. Now he's a counselor. And we just went, hey, this is a great program, and he knows all about your program. He's been attending for several years. Could he be a counselor? And they went, well, we could start as a junior counselor. I said, well, that's where you would start somebody, of course. And now, I think this coming summer, they're making him like a program aide, which sounds really important, doesn't it? Plus, it's a salary increase. So, building those networks can be very, very, very helpful. Paying it forward. We all know the cliche, The idea being that there are times when others have transcended their own experience and offered an idea, a suggestion, a resource, and you've said, wow, that was really great. I didn't know about that intervention or that provider or that support or that network. Recognize the opportunities where you can pay it forward. Recognize the opportunities when you can be talking to somebody and say, I know who's doing that, or I have an idea I might want to share with you. Not in a dictatorial, this is what you should be doing with your child, because that's never fun. But I have an idea, I have a suggestion, I heard about, I read about, I saw, you might want to look into. And I'm sure many of you were saying, I think that's kind of what I do all day, which is awesome, keep doing it. But those of us who maybe don't think about it as often, just those opportunities to pay it forward and say, here's what I know, here's what I learned, here's what my experience has taught me, and here's what I can share with you. My favorite analogy also, I think this is about my 5th favorite analogy, sorry, I've got a lot of them, is that as a parent, the experience for me of receiving a diagnosis for my son when he was 3 years old was as if somebody whisked me into a helicopter, took me over a very dense forest and parachuted me in. And it was dark. And I had nothing. And I was scared. And then I heard a little voice say, follow me, and they had a flashlight. And they were about a step ahead of me. And a step ahead of them was someone with a flashlight who said, follow me. And ahead of them was someone with a flashlight who said, follow me. And that's how we navigate this process, is by following in the path of supports and services and networks and ideas and suggestions from other people. And somewhere, I don't know when it happened, somebody dropped in behind me. And I turned and I went, oh, follow me. And that's the whole pay it forward model, is that what we've learned, we share with others. The other one I want to mention in terms of general suggestions is kind of in the same line, but it's be a beacon. And this is about looking for opportunities for building awareness and building education outside of your normal network. So for example, when one of my sons indicated many years ago, and it was very clear that his interest was working with animals, I went right away to our local SPCA and I said, what can he do where he can spend time in a volunteer capacity working with animals? And to be very honest with you, they kind of looked at him and they went, does he have a disability? I said, he loves to work with animals. And I spent a little time, a little more than maybe I hoped I would have to, building a little disability awareness to help them understand that yes, an individual with disability could be a fabulous volunteer at the SPCA. And then when he was part of his high school program and they were looking at different work-study opportunities, I said, well, isn't there a local humane society? And they said, well, we've kind of never reached out to them. And I said, so how about if we reach out to them? And we did a little disability awareness there. And he ended up finishing his high school career showing several years of work experience, which we know is a critical thing, volunteer and work-study experience, working with animals, have taken that resume to many places, including a couple of amazing letters of recommendation. Neither one of those organizations on the face of it initially said, well, yes, of course, big door open. They were sort of like, well, we have a side door. And I went, no, we'll be walking through the front door with everyone else. Thank you very much. And what do we need to do to help you make that happen? So I think about us making, all of us, making the world autism ready, I guess would be my phrase. So if you walk into a place, it's a place where this young person may want to work, or it may be in their community, and they would go shopping there, and they would use those opportunities to say, hey, and guess what? You know what? He's a really great shopper, and he happens to know all of your aisles, and in fact, I bet he would be awesome helping with your go-backs, because I bet he's quicker than the folks you have on staff right now. Showing those opportunities, being a beacon to organizations, businesses who maybe hadn't thought yet about the value and benefit of our young people being where they are. Being a beacon too also means something really cool happens and I go, how about you and me and her get together and we work together and we come up with an idea, a proposal, a plan. So that could be why I got here today, I don't know. But using those opportunities as well. So those are sort of my general ideas and suggestions across the lifespan. Now what I want to do is talk about a couple of specifics related to the experience of going through the transition process. And again, let me just backtrack with where I am in my own life. I mentioned I have two sons on the spectrum, one's 20 and one's 17. So my 20-year-old graduated from high school with a diploma this past August. He is now actively job searching with the awesome resume, with the recommendations. He's looking for a part-time job in the animal care field. He'll be turning 21 in July. My 17-year-old is a senior in high school. He's been accepted to UMBC, Go Retrievers, which I just learned the other day. The dog's name is True Grit. Who knew? Now he can go. Now we know the dog's name. So one young man is taking a path towards employment and the other one's taking a path towards college. So it's been an interesting experience for me, very different paths. So I wanted to just share that in terms of where I come from with mentioning some of these specific lessons that I've learned. First lesson, you're going to do your homework and then do it again and then do it again. And I probably could have put about 5 more agains, but I made it simple. Those of you who are parents who have started going through this process probably already know what I'm telling you, which is that the complexity of agencies, services, supports, providers, requirements is so daunting, is so overwhelming. There are days I just sit here and go, I bet you couldn't possibly make it harder until I find the next thing and go, oh no, there it is. That just made it harder. And I say that because I want to be honest. Kathy said, now be positive, and I'm like, I'm being positive, but I'm not going to be Pollyanna. It's really hard. So here's what I've done that I have found to be helpful. And it's something that I have been doing for years and years and years as each of my sons was involved in different programs or different interventions. And it's basically my file system. So we're going to try a particular intervention. I open up a file. What day did we start it? Who are we working with? Is it working? Is it not working? When do we go back? When did we discontinue it? When did we increase it, etc.? I did the same thing and continue to do the same thing with all of their transition-related issues. So for example, learning about Department of Rehab Services and DOORS. I got a big fat DOORS file. Learning about SSI file. Housing, I've got 3 housing files because one was about this type of funding, this type of funding, this type of funding, etc. And every time I get a piece of information, and there's a lot of pieces of information that people will hand you, you need to have this, you need to have this, you need to have this, I go back and put it in my file, but I also check and see if the information that I was already working on, am I still on the right track? Do I have to do more homework, is what I'm saying. And what I found is in many cases I have. So I'll give you one quick story. When my older son, when we initially applied for him to receive services through DOORS, which would provide services till he turned 21. Okay? DOORS case manager said, here's how it's going to work. We're going to do A and B, and then he'll get C. And I went, that sounds great. Put it in my DOORS folder. 3 months later, it was, we'll do A and B, but he won't get C instead. He'll get D. Why? I need to know more. Took me 17 phone calls and 3 meetings, but I finally got the answer. I wish I was exaggerating. To find out why he wouldn't get C, instead he would get D. But instead of just sort of going, oh, okay, more information, each time something didn't make sense, I focused on tracking it down. Why was that the case? Because C made perfect sense to me. C made perfect sense to him. Somebody was now saying, no, he couldn't have C, he had to have D instead. I needed to understand why. And at one point, once I understood, I went back and said, you know what, guys? I respectfully disagree. I think that C continues to be appropriate until you give me further information. So that's just one small example. You're going to hear potentially a lot of different seemingly contradictory information. I had been told at one point, for example, that because my son had left school before he was 21, there were certain services he could get through the DDA, like individual support services, before he turned 21. And I went, that's great, what do I do? Many phone calls, many meetings, many emails later, I found out, no, he doesn't qualify for that particular service until he turns 21. So that's sort of my expect. You're going to do your homework and then do it again and then do it again and do it again. You're going to have to accept that the first answer you get is very likely not going to be the final answer, which is unfortunate, but at least if you know ahead of time, it's better than going, oh, okay, C, great, we're going to stick with C, and then when D shows up, you're even more confused. So continue asking questions, continue requiring clarification, verification. You tell your kids to do your homework, expect you're going to do homework. That leads me to my second one, which as you can see is expect pitfalls. And I say that truly in a positive way, and here's why. Remember we were talking about sort of your emotional state? I realized that there have been several situations where the reason I was so angry, I call these the moments where I call my husband and say, on your way home from work, I need you to buy a cat. And he says, why? And I say, because I really need to kick a cat. So we call them my pet store calls. He's like, we're having a bad day, and I'm like, just stop at the pet store. So anyway, just that's our humor. Expecting pitfalls. I realized in hindsight that one of the reasons that I was getting very, very, very emotionally frustrated and aggravated and looking for sharp objects was I truly, naively had expected there wouldn't be any pitfalls because I'm that good. Because I know the system, and I'm going to the meetings, and I'm reading the brochures, and it says A plus B will equal C, and then when it didn't equal C, I had totally not expected that it was going to be humanly possible that it wouldn't equal C, and I was so angry. Does that make sense? So as another brief example of one of those pitfalls, the program that my son graduated from this past August, they provided, it was a very intensive non-public program where he had a full-time psychiatrist, full-time psychologist. Yeah, very intensive program, which is what he needed. Got his diploma in that program. We knew we were going to have to connect him to a community mental health provider. We knew this the minute he started the program, that when he left. I was on the phone 9 months before he graduated, using all my networks, all my resources, sending packets of material to every intake coordinator saying he's going to need a community provider at this time. I received back, great, of course we have the services he needs. I mean, and his profile, the description of his profile was on there, all the diagnoses, everything was on there. 3 different community mental health providers said, absolutely, we have the supports and services he needs. I chose the one that was closest to our home. We went for the intake visit, which was a week after he graduated. And 2 hours, ready? Are you sitting? 2 hours into the intake visit, they said, oh, yeah, actually, we don't have the services he would need. And I said, but 9 months ago, I sent you a packet, and it had all the information, and didn't you review it before you scheduled the meeting? And didn't you review it over, oh, I don't know, the last 120 minutes? 4 other community mental health providers did the exact same thing. 4 others took us through the intake process. And then, sometimes on our follow-up visit, then said, no, actually, we can't meet his needs. At this point, he now has not had a mental health provider for 2 months. We're going back to the school and saying, can you keep continuing refilling his prescriptions? I'm no longer a happy person, okay? But part of why I was so unhappy was because I thought it was going to be seamless. Does that make sense? That made me even more angrier. The best news was that the 5th provider has been perfect for him. But I had to keep going back to my networks and back to my websites and back to my people, and they'd go, what about so-and-so? And I was like, oh, I hate so-and-so. And they'd say, what about these guys? And I'm like, oh, I hate them more. Right? And I truly had not expected that it was going to be as difficult as it was. Now, I don't want to say that to make everybody hide under the covers and cry. I'm saying it so that you can realize that expecting it to be seamless is actually going to make it worse. Does that make sense? Okay. Because I don't want to come away with you all going, forget it, we're done. My last then specific lesson that I've learned is about listening to advice but following your instincts. All of us as parents, through this entire process, since our kids were first diagnosed, have been provided with tons and tons and tons and tons of helpful advice. My mother still sends me the articles from Ladies' Home Journal about what to do because my kid has autism, right? You get them? Yes? Thanks, Mom. Very, very helpful. But as they're going through the transition process, the people who are trying to pay it forward by saying, I know of a provider, or I know of an agency, or I know of a this, sometimes don't come across that way. They come across as the here's what you should be doing, and here's what you should be doing, and you be sure to go to so-and-so, and I know somebody who went there and it was really good, so your kid should go there. It's the finger wag advice, right? It's the here's where you should be doing, and here's what you should be doing, here's what you should be doing. And we've been getting that since our kids were little, so some of us are really good at just going, thanks, thanks, thanks. But remembering that going through the transition process in some way will be even more intense because everyone will have an opinion. Everyone will tell you whether or not you should do guardianship and not ask whether you've thought about it or what your opinion is. They will tell you what you should do. And I'm saying it yes to the service providers too, because everyone who is very, very well intended who cares about this young person is going to have an opinion, and they're going to feel like it's really appropriate to offer their opinion. So what I've learned through this process is just how to take all of those, but then follow your own instincts. And probably most of you who are parents in the room are already doing that. You're listening to what everybody says, and you're saying, you know what? I'm going to go with what makes sense for me. I'm going to do my homework, I'm going to get my information, I'm going to ask my questions, and then I'm going to go with what makes sense for me. But it's been really an important lesson for me because, as I said, my two sons are on very different pathways, and the decisions we've had to make. So as an example, my younger son was not only accepted at UMBC, but he was accepted at several out-of-state schools as well, which is really exciting, but is also as terrifying as anything because he really does need ongoing significant services and supports. And him being 15 minutes away versus 15,000 miles away, which is what it feels like. And so I sat with him and had a conversation, and I said, I know a lot of people have given you opinions. I'm going to tell you what I feel. The decision's yours, but I'm going to tell you what I feel. I feel like starting out is probably going to be better for you if you go somewhere that's really good but is closer to home, because your network is still here, your village is still here, your community providers are still here. But if you decide you want to go out of state, I will do anything I have to and beyond to help create a village for you up there. And I was very happy when he said he would stay close. But it's the instincts. It's the listen to the advice, say thank you very much for the information, but then what makes the most sense? So when people say to me, you know, what decisions did you make for your children about guardianship or not, about placement or not, about provider or not. I say, you know, I looked at all the information, I went and visited a lot of folks, got a lot of information, and then just said what makes the most sense to me, and thanked everybody profusely. Even for that Ladies' Home Journal article, I still thank them. Thank you for caring, thank you for wanting to be helpful, and we're gonna go with our instincts. And our instincts might be wrong. You know, when somebody kind of looks at you and goes, well, if that's what you want to do, you're right. We may be wrong. We may end up changing our mind, and that will be okay. But this is what we're thinking of doing now. So, those are sort of my lessons learned. What I'd like to do now is talk with you just for a couple of minutes about this wonderful checklist which my friends at Pathfinders for Autism have put together. And those of you who are not yet going to or referencing the Pathfinders for Autism site, I want to encourage you to do so, because within the last year, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a board member, honest, but within the last year, one of the things that they developed and put on their site is this lifespan checklist. And you can go on their site, and it literally starts with 0 to 3, and it goes all the way up to 21 and beyond. And this hard copy, you would look at it and say, okay, well, this doesn't tell me as much. There's live links. So when it talks about the autism waiver, there's a live link that takes you right to the process and the application. So every single one of these is connected to further information. And it's been a lengthy project. So I just want to mention that this is a very, very, very small piece of what they have. The reason that Kathy and I thought it was helpful to look at this checklist is because, again, as parents or as service providers working with families, sometimes this is what we're given. Here's your checklist. Okay, go do all of these things because your kid's transitioning, Merry Christmas. And you're like, wow, really? By when? By 5 p.m. go do all these things? Which are the most important? So I thought it would be helpful to kind of highlight for you, based upon kind of where I am in my journey, the ones that I have found to be really, really, really look at these and make sure. And probably those of you who are parents in this process may have already done so. So, under the first heading, about the 4th item down, apply to DDA, please tell me you all have applied to DDA. Please tell me that you already are in and you already have a service coordinator. I'm getting a nod, very good. So essential to do so because I know you know. DDA is the funding source for when they turn 21. And if you haven't done it yet, if you haven't started the process yet, being able to make sure they get funding when they turn 21 is going to be significantly problematic. So you absolutely do that. And when I work with families, you know, the newly diagnosed that are starting with infants and toddlers, I'm like, send your application to DDA. And they're like, but they're 2.5. And I'm like, trust me, send your application to DDA. Now that my son is almost at the July money, we just keep calling it his July money. He loves that. I'm like, honey, you're so close to your July money. Now, of course, our work with service coordination has become much, much, much more intense. We've selected our adult service provider, we've developed our plan, etc. But you got to get in with DDA. Under education, the first item, making the decision about diploma versus certificate. I know for some young people, that discussion has already happened with the school team at multiple times. It happened when the child maybe got their first IEP. It happened maybe in 2nd grade, just before the statewide tests started. Maybe it happened in 5th, transitioning to middle school. Maybe it happened in 8th, transitioning to high school. I can tell you that for my son, who did end up getting his diploma at age 20, at age 18, we were sitting at the table having a very serious discussion about whether we were going to move him off the diploma track to a certificate track. And debating the pros and cons of each with our listening ears on and our calm voices, although it was a very emotional discussion. So, making sure that the discussions continue to happen when necessary and making sure you're making the right decision for the right reason. In our case, what we said was, we think he can successfully earn his diploma if we space out his classes for a couple of years, because it was the intensity of trying to do all the requirements within the standard time frame that was literally killing him. And so we spaced it all out, so he had 3 senior years. Because that's how many years it took to finish up his coursework and finish up his exams. So I just want to mention that that's one of the really important things to be thinking about and considering, because we know that programmatically decisions then follow as a result. About halfway through the education one, there's a wonderful generic one that says, prepare to transition out of high school. And I looked at that and I went, oh, that's a good idea. And I actually realized after the fact that I'm going to send something to my friends at Pathfinders and say, we might want to say a little more than that. But specifically, I realized that the thing that it should say is make sure that the year before their last year of school, you send in the application to DOORS, to the Division of Rehab Services. And if you want to get information ahead of time, just do a Google for Maryland, DORS. And there's tons and tons of information about who DOORS is and what they do. Remember, they were the folks who said A plus B will equal C and then it equaled D. I still love them, I really do. But the more I learned in hindsight, I realized the more I should have known ahead of time. Does that make sense? So DOORS is the agency that you apply to the year before their last year. Don't wait till fall of their last year of school. Make it fall of the year before that you send the application in. Because you have to do an intake, you have to give them paperwork, they have to determine eligibility, you want enough time to understand what services and programs they have. Okay. Under employment, the first item, notice and develop skills that can lead to future employment. I told you my story about the SPCA and the Humane Society. My 17-year-old, we figured out early on, gosh, he has Asperger's and he's good with computers. Shocking revelation. But he sat down with his guidance counselor starting in 9th grade and set up literally a pathway, a computer science pathway in his courses. So for example, as a senior, he's taking gaming design. How cool is that? And by the way, like getting 100% on every project. So it's knowing which way they're going and then helping to find those opportunities for them. So for my older son, it was finding those volunteer opportunities. For my younger son, it was finding the courses that best aligned with his interests. And because we started in 9th grade, if by 10th grade he went, not so much, he had time to change his mind to look at some other course pathways. So looking for those opportunities, looking for those volunteer opportunities. Volunteer opportunities are great on a resume. Paid employment is good, but unpaid employment works really good too. We've had several places that are like, wow, he's doing that for free. I'm like, yeah, every week he's there. Really shows some nice dedication. On the next page, which is on the back, under funding for services, about halfway down, it says apply for Social Security benefits. Okay? The day after they turn 18, not the day before, please, the day after, send in the application for SSI, which is Supplemental Security Income, whatever it is, SSI. And there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of proving that they're disabled, there's a lot of proving. The main thing about SSI is it says that the individual, due to their disability, is not likely to be able to have gainful employment in the next 12 months. Well, for some of our kids, at the age of 18, they're still in school. Social Security doesn't care. Okay? The rule is if, due to their disability, they're not likely to have gainful employment in the next 12 months. The other thing about SSI, the other secret about this is you want to be sure to charge your child room and board. And that's how you can maximize the amount of money that they will get. The day they turn 18, they become a tenant. Because the total amount available per month is about $750. If they're living at home, Social Security will automatically take about $200 off the top, which they call in kind, meaning, well, you don't need all that money because your parents are taking care of stuff. But they would take away even more, except if you say, no, they're paying room and board. So every single month my son gets a check. He's now getting about $650, so they only take about $100 off the top. And of the $650, we take $400 for room and board. And we have an agreement that he signed that says, yes, every month you take $400. Now, there are some parents who say, but I want my son to be able, or my daughter to be able to have that for something. Fine, take the $400, put it into an account. Okay? And then when they're needing the money will be available for them. But my son drinks a lot of milk and eats a lot of bread, and I'm really appreciating that I get $400 to kind of cover his, plus his younger brother sees that as a model of, really, when you turn 18, you're a tenant, which is why he's moving out. But there's a lot of other things you can learn about SSI. There's lots of good information, for example, on Pathfinder's website, but definitely when they turn 18, apply for SSI. The other reason is that when they get SSI, that makes them eligible for MA, for medical assistance. And even if they stay on your family's primary insurance till they're 26, thanks to the new federal health laws, you still want MA as their secondary, because things like the community mental health services all get paid for by MA. And if we didn't have his MA, we'd be paying probably $400 to $500 a week in community mental health services out of our own pocket. So he gets his SSI, he gets his MA. Underfunding, almost to the bottom, it also talks about the legal implications of reaching 18, and that's the last one I want to mention. As I said, for each family, the discussion, the decision about whether or not it's appropriate for the young person when they turn 18 to require guardianship or not, really, 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 it's a look at all your information and go with your instincts. What we did, just to share, was we actually had a consultation with an attorney who specializes in the field. And we brought our son. She not only looked over his documents, but she had a conversation with him. And we actually left the room, and she talked with him about 15, 20 minutes. And at the end of the conversation, she said, I don't think he requires guardianship, but you definitely want powers of attorney. You definitely want a legal power of attorney, a medical power of attorney, and a mental health power of attorney, so that he has legal protection if he needs it should something happen. And she had explained to him what all of those were, that if he needed help, somebody could make the decisions for him. And he said, according to her, would it be okay if my mom and dad made the decisions? And she said, absolutely, they can be on your power of attorney. And they had a very good conversation. Now, some individuals may not be able to have that conversation. Some individuals may have a different level of skill and ability. But in my experience, it was very, very, very helpful to take all the information we had, look at the pros and cons of each, and then have him actually sit down with an attorney and have her offer her judgment and her opinion as to what would be the best course of action, understanding that if circumstances change, we could make a different decision at that time. And he was very excited that he got to sign his name, and a notary had to stamp everything. He thought that was cool. And it makes us feel good knowing that if he needs the protection, he has the protection. There are lots and lots of resources, discussions, seminars, online information about this topic as well. And I think that's the other thing I wanted to say was I mentioned all my files. I definitely have a big fat file about guardianship and a big fat file about power of attorney. So gathering lots of information has been very helpful along the way, and asking lots of good questions. And in that vein, I guess my question to you would be, is there any other information I can share? Do you have any other questions?